Hello and welcome to the IQ Technique Academy. Covering today, we're going to be touching on the Region Master format class. Everything you need to know about the format, as well as how to prepare for a Region Master tournament, some of the easier lineups to expect, and groundwork for how to start a lineup in this new format. This is a new format. I did help come up with the idea of using this as a format both for the Invitational and for some of the qualifiers for the IQ Invitational. I do like multiple formats. I come from a Magic background where there's a plethora of formats, and exploring new ones is always interesting to me as a deck builder and a player. So I hope that you can take away from this a good foundation for this new format. And today, this is going to be an overview of what we'll be going over today, and we're going to get right into it. Starting off, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself, some rules to this format. Since it is a new format, the rules could be a little confusing, especially if you put it in too many words, and where to start building in this meta. I'm your coach today, Nolagold, also known as Jody Keith. You can find me on Twitter at Jody MF Keith or twitch.tv/Nolagold for any of my other content as well. Get the plug at the beginning while I got your attention. And I come in this picture. I come from a Magic background. I was a top professional Magic the Gathering player and coach for 3 years, and it's one of the things that I enjoyed most in my time in the professional Magic arena was actually coaching. So I'm happy to bring that to the Legends of Runeterra community, and it's been something I've been missing since I've been playing LOR. So starting with this IQ Academy has been great, and I'm happy everybody's here to take part in that as well as catch it on the VOD if you missed it on the VOD, and just putting out some good content so we could all grow and be better players at the game. Because then we'll have some more proper contests, baby. That's that's what I'm out here for. So getting into the Region Master format, we can start with the rules. The Region Master format is a 3-deck format, like most tournaments. You probably know about the Region Lock format, where you play 3 decks, can't share a region between any of them. Then there's the Card Lock, which is you can play 3 decks. The regions don't matter. The only thing that matters is you can't play the same card in more than one deck, which is pretty cool because you could actually play two decks that share the exact same 2 regions, and you could have overlap in regions, which makes the diversity of decks that you can bring, I would say, higher than the region lock format. And it's one reason that IQ, many people in the IQ team and administration have really enjoyed that format as well, because the diversity that it brings to tournament lineup building. And the Region Master deck is no exception. It actually, I think, takes it a step further. There is an additional Region Master is card lock with the additional restriction of all 3 decks have to share a single region. So as we see here, Piltover, if you're going to be a Piltover Region Master, that means you have to have 3 Piltover decks. And so making these 3 decks, you can see here, you could have any combinations of regions. You can even have a mono region if you want to do like a mono Piltover. And as I said, if you want to do double Piltover Freljord, you can do that as well with a Piltover Demacia deck as well. So long as all 3 of your decks share the same region, you don't have any problem in the card in the region area of your deck build. And then you just have to make sure that no cards overlap. This does create a hard situation for some regions, because there's a lot of really good cards, or cards that are pretty signature to some regions. Like if you think about Targon, Pale Cascade is a card that goes in a lot of Targon decks. So being able to master that region could be more difficult, but it does actually breed more creativity, this restriction, I think, because then people will explore other region, like within a region, more broad deck strategies, and they touch on things that aren't in the mainstream. Because usually when you play on ladder, a lot of players will play the top decks, and it's kind of hatched out already. Give or take a few cards. Where this can actually cause some creativity, and that's what I hope comes out of this format. When I first envisioned this format, it is something that I really thought would get people to start thinking about the outer reaches of each region that aren't mainstream and bring them into their lineup. And I hope to see that a lot, both in the Invitational qualifier that's going to be held on Friday, as well as the Invitational as well. So, that was a lot of wells. So, we start with the easiest way to build into this format, and what I think a lot of players will try and do is come up with 2 decks that have an allegiance, that focus around using the allegiance mechanic. Again, the allegiance mechanic is a mechanic that whenever you play it, or whenever it comes into play, whenever it's summoned, you get an effect if the top card of your deck shares a region with the allegiance card. And most allegiance decks will play 34 cards is the math. I think you want to play like 6 non-allegiance cards in your deck at most to have a good chance of hitting, or a reasonable chance, or even less sometimes. Sometimes you'll see decks that only play 3 cards from the non-allegiance, and they really try and leverage the allegiance card as a signature card. That's why we saw Demacia Bannerman. It's called Bannerman. If Wraithcaller is in a deck, it's called Wraithcaller, because you'll automatically identify that the deck plays a bunch of cards from their respective regions, whatever the allegiance card is. And you see on the slide here, we have Vanguard Bannerman, we have Wraithcaller as well. These are probably the 2 best allegiance cards. Yordle Grifter did catch a nerf, but it is still very playable. That would probably be another good one. The Piltover one's pretty weak. The Ionia one that gets the 1-drops is good in Elusives, but Elusives really hasn't been that good. And I think it is playable, though, the Elusive deck, the Kinku Elusive. So that is probably lower on the tier list. Piltover one's probably the stone worst. And then we saw the Noxious one kind of go down a little bit. Mountain Scryer is definitely good. So, we see that in some decks even currently. So all in all, this is the easiest way, I think, that people will approach building. Because what this does is it takes away the whole restriction of having all 3 decks be the same region in a big way. Because if you go almost mono a region, and you only splash lightly into the region, in the slide here you see Targon plus Allegiance. You put Hush in this deck, which could easily play another silence effect from its own respective region, Purify. And then you also have Wraithcaller. You maybe splash into, whatever, Pale Cascade or whatever it is, whatever the card is. Not that hard to do. And then effectively cheat the whole system of being a Targon master. Because you probably played less Targon cards in total than somebody mastered another region. And so it kind of cheats that, and it's probably an easy way that people will approach this format. And so do be aware of the Allegiance cards. That's probably something you could expect from a lot of lineups. That's what I'm expecting from a lot of lineups going into this format, is that people will just grab 2 Allegiance decks and then move in with whatever their Targon deck is, or whatever, the respective region master region that they picked would be. Another good starting point, if we're looking at a good region to start with, I think Bilgewater is one of the better regions to start with, and I think it has a good range of strategies built into it. Now, some regions could have trouble. Like we talk about Ionia. Ionia's in a weird place where pretty much every Ionia deck's going to want Deny, similar to Pale Cascade whenever we talk about Targon. But Bilgewater, if we look at just these 3 champions, the cards that go in their kits, vastly differ between each other. Like Tom Kench, you have a lot of self-damaging units. If you put it with Soraka, right, that's a possibility. Tom Kench, his kit doesn't touch the Gangplank kit. And then Gangplank's about plunder and damaging the opponent on their attack rounds, things like that. And then Nautilus, all the deep monsters, they don't go into any of those decks. So this is probably one of the easier regions to master because of the range of the different strategies that are available in this region. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of the more popular ones to go into. Okay, double allegiance. We talked about double allegiance as a way to go. And to give you a couple of examples here, we'll use the foundation of deep, because I wanted to touch on this more than anything else, is that deep is the kind of perfect deck for a region master format. And I just mentioned, plays cards that it doesn't, the rest of the Bilgewater decks don't want to play. If we're talking about Lure of the Depths, if you just look at the list that's on the slide here, Lure of the Depths, Jettison is not in any deck, Shipwreck Hoarder, no deck, Devour, Abyssal Eye, Beast Below, Jawal Hunters, shows up in some other decks, but it's always in this deck. Dredgers, and it's rarely in other decks. Slaughter Docks, same deal, and Nautilus. All of these cards you don't see in any of the other decks. But also to note, the deck also doesn't share many cards with other Shadow Isle decks. When we talk about Maokai, that's a champ that is almost exclusively only in the deep deck. Thorny Toad and Dead Bloom Wander, same thing. You see Fate and Memories here. There is Stalking Shadows played in this deck, which is played commonly in a lot of Shadow Isles, mid-range, fearsome decks, aggro, and Dur decks for sure. And it's a card that I would prefer to play in this deck, but Fading Memories is fine, so is Miscall. Those were options before. Stalking Shadows is a new one. Not a necessity. We also see the One-Up Vengeance here, and then the removal suite varies in the deep deck. The deep deck is the kind of deck that, and I've always said this about the deep deck, where it kind of is dictated by how good its proactive game plan is against the meta, as well as what it chooses for its supplemental removal spells, how they line up against the meta as well. And so it's trying to hit the peg with the big hammer on its strategy, lining up good against the meta at front, but it's the secondary hit with all the supplemental cards that really makes the difference on how good a deep deck is going to be in any particular tournament. In the Region Master format, I think that being proactive generally in most tournaments is going to be good. And so if we forego a lot of the interactive Shadow Isles cards and actually devote that more to promoting our game plan A, hitting deep. As you see here, this list has Beast Below in it, which is kind of a big flex on I'm hitting deep, I'm playing Nautilus, and a bunch of 7/7s for free. Nautilus is coming with a team of 7/7s on turn 7 every time. And having the extra Lure of the Depths encourages that as well, because your Abyssal Eyes can be free with Nautilus out. Devourers are only 1 mana with Nautilus out. They also, not commonly played in the deck, but whenever we are slotting out, Withering Whales, Grasp, not taking those turns off to remove our opponent's stuff and just promoting our game plan to make sure that we're hitting deep by turn 6 or 7 every game, I think is the better take to have on deep on an open meta, for sure. It's a very proactive deck in that way. And then it just leans more on, well, how good is the deep mechanic in the current meta? Well, currently it's really good. If you hit Maokai, there's a lot of mid-range and control decks in the meta. Aggro has been kind of tapered off a little bit, and it's kind of hard to make triple aggro work in a lineup. So giving up those Withering Whales and things like that, like 3 true aggro decks, is kind of hard to do, especially in the Region Master format. So this is going to have a great place as just being proactive, because whenever deep decks are playing against mid-range and control decks, they don't want to draw Withering Whales. They don't want to draw Vile Feast. They don't want to draw those cards. They want to just have, let's put the pain on them. So if we look at this, you even look at the Shadow Isle cards, none of the cards are played in any other Shadow Isles deck. Vengeance can be slotted out for Riptide if you do want to play Vengeance in another deck. You can play Ruination if Ruination isn't in that deck. It's just kind of like a one-of catch-all removal spell that doesn't even necessarily have to be there. And why that all these are reasons why Deep is the perfect deck to build out of. So we're gonna do the Deep pairing with the double allegiance, because the double allegiance is just one of the easier things to do. Here, next up we have the Day and Night deck, aka Kid Cudi deck, right? We have the Diana, Leona. It's basically a mono target deck that plays Mountain Scryer, and then it splashes into Shadow Isles, which we're branching out from Deep. Shadow Isles is going to be the region that we master with this lineup. Unspeakable Horror is the splash. It's another Nightfall card to go with Diana, and it's kind of cool to splash in for this Unspeakable Horror because it's kind of like a Vile Feast effect. So if you wanted to play Vile Feast in one of your other decks, it's still possible since we had that similar effect twice. And it also balances out the Deep deck in a lot of ways because this deck is good against aggro. It comes down early. It has the Solari curve into Leona, which is good at matching the board or beating the board against aggro, as well as Diana being great against aggressive decks as well, being able to shrink in their board. And then you can put the card advantage on them with all the Invoke as well after maintaining the board. Maybe not the best deck in the open field, but there's a lot of value in this deck, which is strong, and it's an Allegiance target deck, which makes it really easy to fit into a comp. And we see it here, just touching on the one Unspeakable Horror. So then we look into the last one. We actually have a full Allegiance Shadow Isles deck. And so you think, well, Nolagold, didn't you say we're going to have two Allegiance decks that splash into this one unit? Well, this just goes to show the power of the Deep deck. The fact that it's like golden in a Region Master lineup, because we could play a whole Allegiance deck from the same region that we're trying to master. But this one could also be used as a deck list potentially to splash into Noxious if you're doing a Noxious. This is an example of one that could easily be splashed into a Noxious lineup. I do think this deck's pretty good. But more importantly, I just wanted to show the example of the fact that this is going to be a common way for people to build their lineups in Region Master. You have this Wraithcaller deck. We have Wraithcaller here. We had Mountain Scryer on the last slide. And they're just taking advantage of the Allegiance to go into it. Next up, we have the Region Master, the all of the region. This is like gonna be using the same foundation of Deep, but we're gonna be able to play other decks that we like to play. And at the end of this call, I will be taking any questions if you're working on your lineup. Be happy to answer any of them as soon as we get into that. But these are just going to be some examples of this is another Allegiance deck that you can use to splash into Freljord, as you see here. But we're using it here as we're taking that same Deep core. Like if we see this Deep core right here, same list that similar list to one we saw earlier, but this one here is going to have the Stalking Shadow in it because we're not doing the Shadow Isles Allegiance, but it shows the flexibility of Deep again of just being in the perfect deck in a Region Master format to be able to splash and to be able to play into another the rest of your lineup. So here we get to optimize it more with the Stalking Shadows, and there's no other deck that's going to want to play. We're not playing Shadow Isles in any of our other decks. So we get a little bit more attuned version of Deep by going this route. We get to go with the Bilgewater Mastery. So we're going to master the Bilgewater. Here we have the Gangplank Sejuani. This is a Turbo Sejuani deck. It's a deck that is pretty strong, levels up the Sejuani and the Gangplank almost as fast as you can play them, and is pretty strong in mid-range formats. Some decks just fold to level Sejuani, and some decks have trouble with the extra damage you're getting off the Monkey Idols. Decks that can't heal or counterclock you fast enough, Swain decks, things like that, do have a lot of trouble. Also, the Yordle Grifter is pretty good. It's also an Allegiance deck. As I mentioned, you can use it as an Allegiance in one of your Region Master lineups as well. Riptide Rex did just get a nerf in the last patch, so it's yet to be seen if it's going to be as good. It's obviously not going to be as good, but still going to have the same closing potential that Rex has had before. and it's also findable off of Babbling Bjerg. So the deck might need a little bit of revamping with the Riptide Rex change, but for the most part, when I put these slides together, this deck seems like a good one for this lineup, and also as an allegiance deck as well. And then Soraka Tahm Kench. See, this would be if you're coming in and you've been playing nothing but ladder and you want to play Region Master. This is the type of lineup that builds out of the deck that you've been playing. So say you're playing on the ladder, whatever the rank is, you just have the most games logged with Soraka Tahm Kench, and this is the deck that you love to play. You can play this, and it's easy to dip into other to flesh out your whole lineup, because you could just bump into the deep deck off of the Bilgewater, and then you have Gangplank as well, as shown earlier. Again, if you look at the core of a Tahm Kench Soraka deck, if we're talking about Bilgewater, it's Tahm Kench, the self-damaging units, and some Shakedown, which can or not be included to the deck. The only must-haves from that region are the Crusty Codger, the Boxtopus, the Fortune Croaker, and the Tahm Kench. So if you look at it that way, pairing a deck with this and Region Master is not going to be hard to do. The only exclusions would be, and it's not an exclusion, it would just be a mild downgrade, is not playing Crusty Codger and Swain TF, which is the only other deck that I've seen playing Crusty Codger, because the plethora of 1-mana 2/2s that they have already in this region. So that's not a big deal, because Swain TF did just fine without Crusty Codger, and doesn't always really didn't always want a 1-drop, so you can easily pair this with, say, Deep and Swain TF as well. You also have Boxtopus, which sees no play in any other deck outside of Soraka, and then you have Fortune Croaker. Now, Fortune Croaker is a different animal whenever it comes to the Region Master format, because there is a new deck that's popping up, which was highlighted in the IQ Ladder Showcase video this week. The TF Go Hard deck, which you might have been seeing on the ladder. It's a newer deck that's kind of come around since the KDA cards have come out and people have gotten access to them. And it uses Fortune Croaker to draw cards while also producing some board presence. And that's something that you can't really give up in that deck. So that would be the one deck that I would say that plays Bilgewater that you cannot pair with this deck because of the Fortune Croaker. It's the only deal breaker for a deck like this, so it's not that hard to make it work. Now, if we did look at the Targon side of this, though, we'd have a little bit more issue because the Guiding Touch and the Pale Cascade. But if we look at the entire region breakdown, those are going to be the hardest regions to make. In the inception of this format, one thing that I loved about it was, because we came up with this format some time ago, Lee Sin Zed was one of the best decks in the meta, and it was really dominating the whole thing. But I said, you can't play that deck in Region Master format. And that's why I like these restrictions, because then people have to be creative. And because that deck played the best cards from both regions. And so it really makes you think about your lineup. So this is like a tier 1 deck that you can play, and it's easy to jump into something else. Yeah, you have to go down to a tier 2 with this Gangplank Sejuani, but still fine. And, this is Maokai Nautilus. And it actually makes sense, this whole lineup, because your lineup's very mid-range, little controlling, with an aggressive slant here, and a very proactive deep list. So it makes sense, it really does, because you have a lot of proactiveness against mid-range control, and then you have a control deck that's decent against aggro, and the weakest thing for this lineup would be an aggressive deck. And that's what I wanted to bring to the Region Master format was, what is the most agreed... So when we get into this question and answer format, we're going over the final thoughts here, I bring the question to you while also taking questions from everybody, is what's the 3 aggro lineup? And maybe you have more to bring to this conversation than I have, because I am not the most aggressive of players. But as far as I can see, and we've seen it in card lock as well as, just card lock, where you see discard aggro paired with pirate aggro. That's a very easy combination to do. We've seen it in card lock a lot. But what is the third deck in that lineup? It has to be a Noxious deck. What Noxious deck does that? Maybe you do Elusives, and that splashes into it. Crimson
It
something.
could be scouts and Splash and Darius, like the Lucian Darius stuff that was going around for a little while.
Lucian Darius. Okay, yeah, okay. So like a Bannerman. Okay, that's exactly what I'm circling into. So that's a good point, Sledfang. You can play a Demacian aggro deck that goes into Darius or Draven or whatever it is for the Noxus, right? Just a light touch into it. That's more of an Allegiance deck. And whenever I look at the Bannerman deck, while it is an aggressive deck, especially if you play Lucian and Draven and things like that, or Darius up top, you put that next to a pirate aggro, you put that next to a discard aggro. You can't do Draven if you do discard aggro, but you put it next to those decks, and it's obviously the most mid range of all three decks, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
It's not as aggressive, and it doesn't have the reach that the other two decks have either. Because you don't have Jinx Rockets, you don't have Get Excited, Mystic Shot if you want it. Noxian Fervor, Decimate. It doesn't. It's not going to have that same reach.
Right, Relentless Pursuit is your only reach.
Yeah. So if you right, it's all unit based damage. Very important because when you look at this lineup, and I'll go ahead and back it up here. You look at this lineup, it can interact with units like Soraka. If you ever put an Astral Protection on anything, it's not going to die in combat ever. So that's kind of big. It's like a 4-mana. The way I look at that card is like a 4-mana Unyielding Spirit, like burst speed, in a lot of ways. And deep, you can outclass their units, right? And so at the midpoint in the game, if they don't have the most aggressive start with Relentless Pursuit behind it, then you start taking that game over pretty quick. Like by the time you play Devour the Depths, that like Devour Fish is turning the corner for you in those matchups. So if they didn't get you with a Pursuit on a Quinn turn, then you completely wreck you. Then you got a good fighting shot, especially if you had Dead Bloom and a Maokai and Maokai didn't die. You can very easily keep up with most mid range Demacia curves. So all in all, I would say that you run up against that triple aggro lineup that you can possibly conceive, and then you could just ban the worst of the other two decks, right? Which would probably be, I would imagine, it would be the Jinx deck or the Pirate aggro deck, whichever one would be worse for one of these decks, because you would. What's that?
Third Noxus aggro deck is
Yeah.
just got to be Fearsome Allegiance, right? Like Shadow Isles Fearsome Allegiance with the Darius, and the only overlap.
Yeah, right. The Shadow Isles. Yeah. If you look at that deck, you have. Let me pull that one up on the slide here so that we can get an accurate visual here. The one that we had in our first recommended list, the first example list, not recommended. But
aggro, that's the easy way to do it.
This here. Yeah.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, you can do this, but that still doesn't change the fact of what I was saying earlier. Like the Fearsome's good against the Soraka Kench for sure, but for the most part, this deck plays a lot like a mid-range deck. I mean, it has Harrowing in it. It's looking to close on turn 6 or 7. It's not like you're effectively dead on turn 5. You have to kill me in a couple turns. And a lot of the damage comes from combat as well. So if you can deal with the creatures, it's not that bad. This is an aggro deck. It's aggro slanted, but it is the most mid-range of the three. Can we agree on that? Does that make sense? And so that's the point I'm making, is if you run into this, say this is the third deck, then that's a great example too. If this is the third deck, then it's the most mid-range of the three decks. And so your best shot is to slow down their whole lineup by just removing their most aggressive deck in the ban phase. Does that make sense? If you're playing that one lineup. And then that's only one lineup that can really produce a triple aggro. Unless you're doing triple Demacia, right? But you can't really do triple Demacia because what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to have to make some splits somewhere. And one of the decks is going to end up mid-range for sure. And Demacia is one of the worst regions to master, I think, as well. For that same reason. Because the range on the units, there is like aggro with Lucian, right? And then there's mid-range with like Garen, Fiora Shin, whatever you want to do, right? And then there's control with Lux. But the problem is, or if you want to do dragons in the middle, aggro, mid range control, right? Archetype wise. But the thing about it is single combat needs to be in all three of those decks. Like you don't want to be playing your Lux without single combat while it's got the barrier. You want single combat in the middle for the Fiora deck, and you want it. The aggro decks can go without it. Probably the only deck of the three that can really go without it. It's like one of the best cards in the region that you're going to want to play. So it'd be kind of hard to build 3 Demacia decks. Even Allegiance decks that will want to splash into Demacia, think about Targon, like Leona Asol. That deck splashes in for what? Single combat. You see what I'm saying? So that's another one that's really hard to build. So I don't think that a triple aggro is going to be... I mean, if it is, we're looking at it right here. So this is one thing to prepare for. The triple aggro lineup is going to be that. It's going to be coming out of Noxious. It's going to be those 2... 3 and 3A, decks, I would say. Probably Fearsome, barely touching it as you see here on the screen. Or, the other deck, hold on, let me see if I can full screen this. Yeah, so, all in all, I don't think it's going to be a very aggressive format. It's going to err on the side of, somebody's going to get stranded with mid-range decks. There's only one kind of aggro lineup that I think you can really build in Region Master. It's going to make the format more mid-range, some control, and yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of what I like in the game, so I'm pretty excited for the format. But as far as building towards it, I think this is going to be the first couple places that people go. They're going to want to start with 2 Allegiance decks and then take their favorite deck and then pick a region between the 2, find 2 cards that Allegiance decks can use, and then jump into it. So prepare for the Allegiance cards. Don't be surprised to see Mistwraith, Bannerman. Those are probably going to be real popular strategies in this format to prepare you for this format. Now, building on your own, now we do the question and answer. Where are you guys working right now towards your builds? How can we help? Do you have any outliers, or do you have your own list that you want us to look over? All that's open to the floor now that the presentation's over with. Thanks for sitting through it.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm a little newer to Legends of Runeterra, so my pool isn't especially deep. How would I ideally go about building 3 decks?
Well, aside from just building a deep deck, then your pool will be deep. I guess the best way, no, honestly, you can. So when you talk about your card collection, I think that one of the easier tracks for building a card collection is using the in-game tools. The region rewards. Whenever you level up, you're going down that track. All the region rewards are going to be from that region. You can focus on that region on acquiring new cards. And I think Region Master format is actually one of the better tournament formats for accessibility outside of a single deck format, which has never been popular. But as far as 3-deck tournament format, this is the best format, I would say, for that. Because I think that most players, and you got experience with this, probably like come into the game and they find a deck that they want to play and they start playing, and then they go down the region path and they get a lot of cards from the same region. And so then they have a lot of cards to build from a singular region, and they could branch out from there with the other cards that they have. So I think it should be easier. And then, we will do another coaching call on card management, collection management at some point, even though this game is very free to play and it's cheap to pay to play as well. Maximizing the, the card collection is definitely going to be a call we're going to have in the future. But just to touch on a couple points that will be in that call, if you're focusing on building your collection, you want to definitely make sure you increase your region rewards as much as possible. You want to make sure you're filling those things out. I think that it's better to jump around in the first 4. That way you can unlock that one champion in each one. But beyond that, you want to finish them out. So the ones that you have finished, you should have a good amount of cards from. So long answer to your short question. It's going to be probably best for this out of any other 3-deck region format.
Can I give a general
Thanks for your question.
format?
Sure.
Okay, so if you do the region rewards in sections of 4, on every
Yeah.
fourth multiple is when you get the best, like the wild cards. So like 4, 8, 12, 16 for each region. That's how you can optimize doing it in sections of 4.
Yeah, in chunks of 4. Yeah, I like to do the first 4, and then the next 4, and then I'd like to finish depending on what I'm looking for. I on my free to play account, my FTP EU account. That's how I did it. But if you're looking to amass a wide count of cards, then definitely. On my FTP account, I did rush through on Ionia because Elusives was very popular at the time, and so I wanted to unlock the epic wild cards as fast as possible, the epic card capsules, so I can get access to the Windfair. But there's different reasons to do it, and if you're working on to play in Region Master Tournament, and you're filling out one region. Some people don't know that tip, but that's a great tip. That's a great tip. So if you just stayed on the same track, then it's even easier.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I don't know, anybody else? Got anything else y'all are working on? Did y'all have y'all's lineups figured out for tomorrow's tournament and the
So
invitational?
what I'm thinking is that I'm thinking it's gonna be TF Swain because, like I said, I like Leviathan's inevitability. I think it's probably one of the stronger inevitability tools. So I think it also has to be deep because
Okay.
that also kind of accomplishes the same thing of beating up on mid-range decks. I think both of those decks do well at that. And then I'm not entirely sure what my third deck should be. I think it goes to Rocket Kench, but like that mid-range matchup is usually 50-50, I believe.
For deep, yeah.
Well, I'm saying as far as like Rocket Kench versus the field.
Oh yeah, like yeah, Rocket Kench is a great deck. I think it goes well against most decks in the field for sure.
Yeah, so that's probably the lineup I end up on, but that's where I'm starting at least.
Nice, Bilgewater, Master. Okay, and then what about the consideration between? I do want to bring this up, as we did earlier. The Codger has been seeing play in Swain TF, but you're not gonna. So you already have that in mind to cut that and then play something else, right?
Right, yeah, I think it has to be a more traditional TF Swain build
Okay, okay.
because he seems the Cadger's like infinitely more useful in the Soraka Kench deck.
All right, we'll get traditional, but don't get ancient. Because remember when that deck used to play Jewel Hunters?
Yeah, we're not playing that guy.
Can't do that.
He just gets eaten up by Go Hard.
Yeah, for sure. No, it was funny because in my experience, the card lock format, the first tournament I played in, it was card lock. It was like, oh, play Swain TF. Deep was a lot better back then. And it was like, okay, Deep, Swain TF. And it was like, wait, what about the Jewel Hunters? I'm going to have to cut it from my Swain TF deck. How are we going to do it? It's funny because over the test of time, it didn't make it as like a standard in that deck list.
Right, it's somewhat prevalent in Deep and not even always.
Nice.
So as far as splash over, is there any limit of cards that you need to have in a deck to make it Region Master? Like say I'm playing Demacia, right? And I'm just splashing 3 Harrowing, or I'm just splashing 3 Misfortune. Is that enough to be considered a Region Master?
3. Wait, say that again. I'm sorry.
3 copies of any card. Actually, 1 copy. If say I just wanted to play Demacia and I'm playing 1 copy of an Ionian card, just to make it an Ionia Region Master deck, is that a possibility, or is there a limit?
Yeah, if you're gonna be an Ionia Master, you can play a Demacia deck with 39 Demacia cards and 1 Ionia card.
Gotcha, for sure.
Yes, so you just throw 1 in there. Doesn't even have to be Deny, which is the one you think you would play. It could be something completely wild, off the wall. Honestly, doesn't matter much. And that goes back to the point that I had about the obvious way to build. The first, I think what a lot of people are going to do is break down the whole deck building requirement of having 3 decks share a region by playing a mono deck, We saw it a lot in the region lock format earlier on when Bannerman was big, and almost every lineup would have Bannerman because the deck was all Demacia, sometimes mono Demacia. Very rarely, but it splashed for 1 or 2 denies, or it splashed for, off region champion, but normally it was just Fiora Garen, all Demacia, light splash, if any, to go with the Bannerman. And that just kind of falls into the category of the Allegiance. And I think that's the first starting place for a lot of people, is just break down that whole deck building requirement by playing 2 mono region decks, almost near mono region decks, and then dip into. I mean, you look at Darrowing when it was in its heyday. I mean, that deck, of course, any Allegiance deck, it's just playing 3 or 5 cards that go into the other thing, and some of those cards don't touch much. It's funny because I actually did that. Some other decks, we can talk about some other decks. Like Kick-Axe, that was a deck that I liked a lot. It's a noxious deck that doesn't play any of the air quotes noxious cards, like Might, Draven. I mean, Draven now has more of a home because of discard aggro, but at the time, it was perfect for a card lock tournament because it was an Ionia deck that just didn't touch much on the that region, the noxious. It played the noxious cards that nobody wanted, Kato and. But other people trying to, speaking about noxious region master, because I think those regions are going to be the most important. The Bowswater, noxious, Freyord, those are probably the 3 easiest to master, and probably will be the most popular and strongest. I think Piltover being the worst, Demacia probably being another bad one, Ionia and Targon for the reason of a lot of the cards. The reasons to play those regions are particular cards, and less so anything else. The nauseous one, people might try and do Ash Sejuani. That's a nice one because it only uses Reckoning, which is played in no other deck. Culling Strike, not many decks. The Glory Seeker's not in all the other decks. So that one gives you some range as well, as it's not technically an Allegiance deck, but it doesn't use many of the noxious cards that are very popular. That's a very Freyord deck, basically. So, but if you throw that in a lineup, though, with your discard aggro, and this is what I was pointing out earlier, about a mid-range lineup that is good against mid-range and control being good, because this format promotes a lot of mid-range and control. I mean, all the Allegiance cards really do promote mid-range gameplay. Like, Bannerman is an aggro deck, but as explained earlier, it's more of, a board position, mid-range style deck. It can play mid-range. You see what I'm saying? And whenever we look at it that way, if you throw an Ash Sejuani in the mix on those 2 double aggro lineup, then you could ban out one of the aggro decks, and then they kind of get stuck with the mid-range deck, which is not where they want to be if you're over here with. Obviously that deck would be good against Soraka Kench, just because of Reckoning, but
Right, and Culling Strike.
yeah, Culling Strike, yeah. Removing your stuff's big, but removing all your stuff's even bigger. So that's like the worst of it all, honestly. What's up?
You think this mid-range, like board-centric kind of thing is going to be a strong lineup in general?
I think that this format promotes that more than the other 2 formats, honestly. And so if that's that's just, if I were to guess how the meta would be, I would imagine that it would devolve into that. More so mid-rangey. You can't really triple control if you're region mastering that hard, except for like mild splashes, like Leona. Into, I don't know. It seems like you can't get more than 2 control decks out of a lineup, and you can't get more than 2 aggro decks out of a lineup. You see, and I mean true aggro, right? So that's what I think. And given that being the case, I think it will middle more than most formats.
Okay, so since you announced this format, this is 40, by the way. I'm just
I know.
say since this one was announced, I've kind of had a lot in my head. Can I throw it at you and see what you want?
Sure. Yeah, of course. That's what this session's all about.
All right. So Bannerman, like for the falling, Banner like elites rather.
Right. With what?
Harrowing. This is the
Right.
Shadow Wild method.
Okay. Yeah.
Gangplank Thresh as a mid-range centric type deck that destroys all other mid-range centric type decks. I have like 500 games on that deck.
Okay.
And Nightfall to fill the gap.
And Nightfall to fill the gap. Okay. Well, that lineup there, it sounds like you're building it off the Gangplank Thresh, right? Because you say you got 500 games on it?
Literally everything I do builds off of Gangplank Thresh.
Okay. Look, I don't live like that, but guess what? It sounds like a nice way to live. All right. So if that's your focal point, that's your deck, and that's what I mentioned in the second part of this is like building off of a deck, like where we saw that lineup that I showed earlier, where Soraka Kench. If that's your deck, how do we build a lineup off of it? Okay. Well, you could do. You're gonna do the Shadow Wilds off of that. Okay. Now this Bannerman deck is an easy one. See, because it's Allegiance. And if you go Shadow Wilds, it's great that your Allegiance is going to take advantage of two of the best cards. Like, you're playing Harrowing, but no Ruination, right? Just Harrowing?
Yes.
Okay. Because I've seen lists with Ruination and Harrowing, which is crazy. But you can Ruination with the For the Fallen, which is pretty cool. But maybe as a one-of. Just throw that idea at you. But the Harrowing is nice in that deck. Getting it all back, you get the Bannerman trigger again. You get double Cithria boards and kill them, one shot them with the whole board fearsome. It's great. It's a good counter to a lot of the things that are good against that. So I think that deck's fine. I think it is like tier 2, tier 3 for sure. But I think that you are giving yourself, there's more room for you to build there. If you're playing Gangplank Thresh and you want to do Shadow Wilds, this Nightfall deck, what's your relationship with the Nightfall deck?
It just kind of, I still have the cards up to play with that. There's no reason for that card.
Okay, I don't know if you like playing that deck. You played it a lot. You think it's good. There's, I didn't know how intimate you were with Nightfall or Bannerman. We know how you feel about the Gangplank Thresh. We need to know about your relationship with the other two decks.
Gangplank Thresh is coming. If I could run 3
Oh, yeah.
Thresh,
Yeah. Well, we made the rules where you can do that. So, because everybody was just bring triple the same deck. So, what's the, so you're not married to those other two decks?
Nope, not at all.
Okay. Well, you got a lot of room to work with here because you have Shadow Isles and, Bilgewater, and both of those are, like I said, that's in the triangle. Well, it's not really a triangle; it's more like a square. Freljord, Shadow Isles, Bilgewater, Noxious. Those are probably the regions that are going to be the most mastered and represented in the Region Master format. I think currently, the way the card pool is now, it makes the most sense. So you're playing one of each, right? So you have a lot of room there. To do a lot of different things. So if you want to reach out to a Bannerman deck, you can, but it just seems like, something that's just too obvious and easy to do. Okay, and I think you can do better. So if we're going to do that, you can run the same region lineup if you want. You can just throw it right next to a deep deck if you want to play deep. And what's that?
Yeah, that's totally.
So you could just run deep next to it easy. Because, like, that deck, Gangplank Thresh, it's not playing Salvage. It's not playing any of the deep stuff. And then your deep deck, you could just move the removal around. Like, Stalking Shadows, are you playing that at all in your Gangplank Thresh deck? Yeah, I didn't think so. So, I mean, without looking at the code, I would just guess. And, like, you could actually put it in the... If you have the code available, you can drop it. But I don't really need the specifics to tell you. You can play the deep deck with that, and then your next deck can be of either of those two regions, you see. So, like, you can do, like, a Zombie Ash, which would be nuts, because it's one of those other mid-range decks that prey on mid-range decks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
And then you still get the juice out of the Harrowing and the Ruination. You don't leave some of the better cards from Shadow Isles off the table. There. And then you even get to play the Vengeances in full, if you want, in the deep deck, as many as you want, because you don't need to play them in the Ash deck. You can play him in the Ash deck if you want. I don't know how much experience you have with that deck, but if it's a mid range slogfest, like you're fighting well against Swains, doing great against Sejuani's, you're killing Ash Sejuani's hard with the Zombie Ash. Zombie Ash is a great tournament deck because a lot of the counters to the best decks just lose so bad if it lines up well against some of the better decks. And I think that even Soraka Kench can like have trouble with a deck that has Ruination, Vengeance, as well as, just Ice Veil, Rhymefang Wolf. Rhymefang Wolf, they don't really have any way to remove it. It's Pale Cascader, or they ain't got it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if we're expecting a lot of Soraka bench, and we're running Thresh, Crumble isn't the worst card in the whole world. Right?
Yes. And whenever I said Zombie Ash, I did want to clarify because you are playing Thresh Gangplank. That deck can be played with Elise, which is a really good card in the meta in general right now. You can play Zombie Ash Elise, you see, and it gives you this fearsome early game, so you have more aggressive draws against aggro. I mean, you have more board presence against aggro, and you have more clock against control. If that makes sense. Yeah, I got a code for that. I can hit you up with that later for sure. That's what I played before I played the Thresh version, honestly, during the Darrowing days. And then I've since tried it, and it was doing great, just as great as the other version. Different kind of inevitability on the back end. It gives up a little bit of the I got 6 Ash board off my Harrowing. Gives up a little bit of that by having a better earlier game with the Elise. And Fearsome's really good with freeze, because like you can just the same way that your Ash, you Ash, a single Ash with a Harsh Winds can just make a board not be able to block. Similarly, that Harsh Winds when your board is like Frenzy Skitter, the 2-drop Spider, as well as Elise. I mean, that's like 7 power unblockable. If you freeze their 2 things that can block Fearsome. You see what I'm saying? And Fearsome's like uniquely good against, Tom Soraka. Does that make sense? But you don't even have to stretch down that hole if you don't want to. What I'm saying is you have a lot of options, especially if you pair that Thresh Gangplank deck, and you pair that right next to the Deep deck. You have all the options between 2 other regions, to where you don't have to play an Allegiance deck that splashes into it. But you can. I don't think it's wrong to, but I think that you can do better than the Bannerman deck. Okay? I think you're not in a wrong spot, though, because if you're playing Harrowing, it's one of the better cards in the game, honestly. And there's a lot of mid-range decks that just can't beat the Harrowing. Right? Funny to say it like that, but it is the Harrowing, isn't it? Or is it just Harrowing? Questions. I don't have the answers for all the questions. That's one I don't have. But you see what I'm saying? So like maybe it's right to play a Harrowing. I don't know if there's a better Harrowing deck than that, though, is the thing. I think that if you're going to do Shadow Wilds, you should probably play a Harrowing deck. Some deck that can play Harrowing. Yeah. Wait, all you're hearing is what?
Then I need to bring something more spicy.
Well, some people say I'm a little too edgy with my deck selections for tournaments, and I mean, compared to what everybody else is playing, that's definitely true, but it's not fully intentional, and I just don't like playing the most known quantities all the time. And I think you get an advantage from playing things that people aren't used to playing against, basically. Like Zombie Ash disappeared. It's been gone for a little while, and I think it might be time to bring it back. There's a lot of decks like that. You just do callbacks to older decks, and I saw this in Magic as well, in the oldest Magic formats. I've always been masters of Legacy and Vintage and things like that, because I'll bring decks that people haven't played in 5 years, and then just basically take a week to tune it and figure it out how to bring it into the modern day. And it's like, what would this deck look like in 2020, And it's shorter time frame, obviously, the lifespan of Legends of Runeterra, but we're getting new players, new tournament players, new players every day that weren't around when Harrowing was 10 mana, or when XYZ was XYZ. And then it's like, whoa, is different. If you just look at the buffs in the last patch, taking advantage of why every time there's a buff in a patch, I'm always like, all right, what deck used to play this? Like Lucian even. I would probably play a Lucian Harrowing deck before I played that Bannerman one. How about that, Morty? Does that make sense? Because Harrowing is nuts with Lucian. You know how that works, right?
For sure.
Yeah, somebody pulled that on me the other day on the ladder. It's nice. Yeah, it'll level up and give you another combat, which is sick. Now, it doesn't like if you had an unleveled Lucian, pretty sick. Or if you just got Lucian in play and then you Harrowing, all those units die, and then your Lucian levels, and the Lucian gets to attack again with the double attack. So, see, that was just if you want something similar, that's just going to be better. I don't know what the right list is. Somebody got my stream last night and sent me a list, and we won like 3 games with it. I'll send you that code if you want to give it a try. Looked a little weird to me, but we couldn't lose with it. And it was small sample size, but it might be a good starting point for you.
I've got one other list I want to throw. One other lineup I want to throw at you.
Sure.
And this one's like pretty unrefined because it's based on the buffs from like yesterday or whatever. All right, so we have the Gangplank Sedge mid-range allegiance deck, right?
Yeah.
Consistent and standard deck. Also, the day and night. I've got a decent amount of experience with target allegiance deck.
Yeah. 2 allegiance decks.
And then the last one being this is a Freljord, by the way.
Right.
So
what are you doing? Omen Hawk or Fury of the North?
Both of those probably.
I'm talking about in your day and night deck.
Fury of the North.
Okay.
And then I think if we're targeting the mid-range stuff, I remember from a while back that Vi Israel Frostbite deck that was around for forever, but literally only in the tournament scene.
Yeah.
That?
Yeah, I do. And the Heimer Ezreal Freeze deck that was the predecessor of that one. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, like that.
That sounds dope, actually. Honestly, I think Heimer might even be better because the flashes are pretty strong. You can hit Battle Furies and you can hit. I don't know if you're playing Flash in the Vi Ezreal version, but yeah. Well, no. Instead of the Vi, I know the freezes are nice with the Vi, and I'm not sure which is better, but it is a consideration because it is going to be mid range, and Heimer's actually pretty good in mid-range. I've been playing some Karina lately, and it's been good. But I think, that old version, you got the freezes coming out of the Archer that also level up the Ezreal. Ezreal's a must. The support and cast is, up to you, honestly. I don't think... They're 2 different cards. It depends on what you want to do. I think you get more value out of Heimer, but maybe Vi's more aggressive or just more board control because... You only have damage-based removal and freezes, so it's very possible that you might need the Vi. Again, I don't have much experience, but I do remember the freeze Ezreal decks of all the varieties from the whole time. So, the Vi one in particular could be better. I think that's, a good place to go with Ezreal right now, with the rework on Ezreal. And just as much as I thought that the Karina would be good too. And the Karina was good. I picked up 100 LP yesterday in an hour and a half, 2 hours. It was good. So
I think that's a decent idea, the frozen Israel deck. I topped one of Maverick's tournaments back in the day with that, so I feel like I'm not comfortable with it obviously, but it's got a warm spot in my heart, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well if you do that though, it does actually you would have to do 2 Allegiance decks that go into Freljord because it uses a good amount of what you're going to want, like Frostbite, Flash Freeze, Ice Veil, possibly Troll Chant. I don't know. Troll Chant does level up Ezreal and protects Ezreal. I think probably Troll Chant's actually dope because if you do the Heimer version or the Vi version, because a Vi with a Troll Chant sounds nasty, honestly. And it also levels the Ezreal as well. So like if you got 2 off and saved something, like if you did 2 damage with your edge roll and saved it from a challenger or something, like that'd be nuts. Or a removal spell.
All right, I'm gonna go smash the head of the deck builder now. Thanks, buddy.
All right, yeah, thanks for showing up, man, and good luck in the tournament tomorrow. Yeah, and if there's no other questions, I'll just go ahead and wrap this up.
All good on my end.
Same. This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And if you caught it on the VOD and you have any further questions, make sure you just join in the Academy chat. Make sure you at me, at Nolagold in the chat, and I'll make sure to see it and respond. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. One love, good vibes, and we'll catch you on the next call on Tuesday.